If you don't already know me, my name is Eric. I am an independent illustrator. I mostly make tarot decks like this one. This is my endless tarot deck. I'll show you some artwork for that in a minute, of course. But I'm doing something a little bit different lately where I've been reviewing video games before I play them by doing a little tarot reading. And a while back, I did one of these sort of pre review tarot readings for the game Clair Obscur Expedition 33, which I went into not really knowing very much about at all. I pulled 6 cards before I started playing it to just kind of get a sort of predictive sense of what the game might be about, how it might make me feel, what the gameplay was going to be like. And now I have finished that game and I wanted to revisit those cards that I pulled. So if you haven't already seen that previous video, you can go watch that. I'll put a link in the description. But I'm going to kind of recap what I had pulled originally anyway, talk about what my thoughts were at the time and what they are now that I've finished the game. I'm going to try and keep this video as spoiler free as I can in case it's a game that you'd like to play. But just keep in mind, I've already played this game. I already have some insights into what it's like, what the story was like, what the gameplay was like. And this is basically going to be a review of the video game kind of through the lens of these 6 tarot cards. So to get us started, I think I'm just going to go in order of the 6 cards that I pulled. And I'll talk about what each card was meant to represent, how I sort of interpreted it the first time I did this reading, and how I'm kind of readjusting my take now that I've finished the game. So the first card that I pulled was to give me just a general vibe of what the game was going to be like, how the game was going to play, how I was going to feel about it, just a general impression of what the game is. And the card I pulled was the Ace of Wands, which usually has a lot to do with creativity and like having a lot of creative energy. And I was thinking that when I first pulled this card, I was guessing that the game was going to probably be really inspirational, that it might leave me feeling creative and energized to maybe make art. And I still feel kind of similar. It is a really creative game. I almost feel, though, like this represents that one, it is a game that has a lot to do with creative energy. The characters within the game, the plot within the game, I wouldn't say revolve around, but definitely heavily involve this idea of having creative energy to make something and where you put that energy, what you put that energy toward. And I also think that the people who created the game probably really had a lot of the same Ace of Wands energy behind them as they were working on the game. It's really unique, it's really creative. And you can tell that there's like a lot of passion behind it, both in the story, and I think you kind of just get that sense from the people who made the game that they were passionate about what they were working on. It feels very much like a passion project. It is also a story that involves a certain amount of passion being channeled into a creative energy. So really good card for just like the general vibe of the game. I don't know if I could have picked a better card to represent just sort of how the game comes across in a really broad and general sense. The second card that I pulled was to get a sense of the story quality of the game, and I pulled the Queen of Wands for this. We had the Ace of Wands for the general vibe and the Queen of Wands for the story quality. When I had first pulled this card in my reading, I sort of was really thinking about how the Queen of Wands represents like somebody who excels in their sort of connection to other people, that they're a social butterfly, that they're the life of the party, that everyone tends to sort of revolve around them when they show up, and that they're great at commanding influence. And the Queen of Wands is often somebody who I think sort of becomes a central element of a conversation or helps to direct conversation. I was thinking this might indicate that like the story of Clair Obscur would revolve around like the party dynamic and the coming together of several characters under like one central element or maybe even one central person. I think that remains true, but not in the way that I had expected it to. The story of Clair Obscur kind of opens with this world where each year, this strange, mysterious, magical figure called the Paintress sort of paints a giant number on a huge monolith. And then at the end of the year, everybody whose age corresponds with that number dies all together at the same time in this weird, magical, almost like rapture event called the Gamage. So you have this paintress, and she's basically doing what seems to be a countdown where the number decreases every single year, starting, I believe, with 100. And when the game takes place, at the beginning of the game, it's the end of the 34 year. Everybody who's 34 years old dies, and the number changes to 33, hence the name Expedition 33. Each year, an expedition is sent to hopefully stop the Paintress from continuing this countdown. And so early on in the game, kind of the first half of the game, um, the rallying of people behind this common goal of defeating the Paintress, that is incredibly central to the plot. I almost feel like this Queen of Wands is sort of the Paintress. But as you get to know the other characters of the story better and you get more details about who they really are and what their backgrounds are, there are parts of the story that start to revolve around other characters, depending on who's kind of taking center stage at the time. It's hard to say that there's like one main character to the story, but you kind of get these interesting perspective shifts where, like, for this part of the game, this character is sort of the main character. And then for that part of the game, that one, and then this one. And you kind of almost have taking turns of who's sort of the central focus. And so I still think that this Queen of Wands applies to the story quality of the game because it is very much about like who is central, who's the life of the party, in other words. Who are we revolving around? How are we navigating these sort of social dynamics of the party? But again, it was kind of in a different way than I had sort of originally expected, but I think still very relevant. Our third card, this was to represent the gameplay quality, and I had the Four of Swords, which I kind of took to represent that the game was going to be fairly slow paced. I knew going into it that the game had a turn based combat system of some kind. And so I thought that is generally a slower pace of gameplay than a lot of other RPGs that are, more real time action. What's interesting though is that as far as turn based games go, it's incredibly fast paced, actually, much to my surprise. The gameplay sort of revolves primarily around like exploration and combat. And the exploration is maybe not the fastest paced thing, but the combat, alarmingly, despite being turn based, is very fast paced. Whenever you choose an ability for a character to use, you have to do sort of a quick time event where you sort of have to press a button or a few buttons in a really specific timed way in order for your attack to be more powerful, for it to be as successful as it could be. And then on your enemy's turns, you have similar quick time events to try and defend or dodge from your enemy's attacks. And it turns into this really fast-paced, it almost feels like a rhythm game, like a DDR type of rhythm game where you're trying to sort of press buttons in these specific patterns to either land your attacks more successfully or defend yourself from your enemy's attacks. So my original interpretation that the gameplay was going to be kind of slower, more restful, completely wrong. But I don't think this card isn't relevant in a different way, because I feel like playing Expedition 33 was almost like a break from the normal games that I have been playing. It was so different in terms of story and even in terms of gameplay, even though I do play a lot of turn based RPGs. It was so different than what I'm usually playing. Even the things that I thought I was going to want to compare it to, like the Persona series, or just other turn-based games that I had just played recently. I thought it was going to be kind of similar to those, and I felt it was completely different. But the Four of Swords is about rest, it's about taking a break, and I did kind of feel like I was taking a break by playing Expedition 33. It felt different enough from my usual thing that it was, again, just kind of a break in my normal routine of video gaming that I do. This fourth card of the reading was to represent the game's strongest points, and I pulled the Emperor for this. And immediately what this made me think was that the game is going to be incredibly well structured. The Emperor is all about authority, order, structure, rules. It made me think that the game was going to be like incredibly precise in its execution, and that would be really successful. And I feel like I was right on the money with that one. It is a really well structured game. I would maybe say personally that the story of the game is its strongest point for me. I really enjoyed the plot and how creative the story was, but that story was extremely well structured. Whenever it presents you with a plot twist, it's something that like they were really good at leading up to, but still manages to take you by surprise. The delivery of the story is incredibly successful, but also the gameplay itself is really well structured. I mentioned earlier, you're kind of going in between sort of phases of exploration and phases of combat, but that never felt stale to me. There was always some new element or twist, or the environment was so new and different, or the enemies were so new and different than the ones I'd been fighting before, that I was never bored with that kind of back and forth of exploration and combat. Turn-based games, I think, are a lot more prone to feeling repetitive, at least for me, just by nature of being turn-based, but I never felt bored with having a small party of characters, just doing combat again and again, because I was always discovering kind of new ways to strategize, or I was fighting new enemies that sort of required me to change my normal flow and rhythm and plan. So there was this like structure element that really like made the game continue to be a lot of fun, both in terms of story and in terms of gameplay. The structure, really incredible. You can tell that the people who made the game absolutely knew the people, the person. You can tell they absolutely know what they're doing. They're really good at creating what they set out to create. Really impressive structure to this game. This next card was to represent the weak points of the story. And what I had pulled was the Page of Swords. What I had initially interpreted this as was that maybe I would leave the game with too many lingering questions. The Page of Swords really represents this like thirst of curiosity, this like desire to know more and more and more. And I thought that the game might end in kind of an unsatisfying way. For me, it did not. But I could very easily see that being a complaint that some people would have. I think that the creators of the game wanted you to kind of leave with certain questions or doubts. And that is very Page of Swordsy. It was a good balance for me, though, personally, of like, there was enough explanation, and the way I was questioning or doubting things toward the end, um, it felt appropriate. It felt like there was a reason and a logic behind it that I could enjoy. Maybe not for everybody, but one thing I will say, I did have this Page of Swords moment of like wanting more, of feeling really curious. At a certain point in the game, there's a little bit of like a shift in the dynamic of the game where it feels like the world becomes a lot bigger, and you kind of understand a little bit of the details of that world on a more deep, insightful level. Trying really hard not to spoil things, but it's almost sort of like you get to sort of glimpse behind a curtain and sort of see in more detail kind of a clarity of the deeper workings of the world. And it's a great aspect of the game. I really love it, and I really feel like they nailed it. But I wish we had been in that place more. Like, I wish I had been able to see that deeper level and explore it a little bit more in detail. I felt very much like a Page of Swords not getting to explore the thing that I wanted to, but I think maybe that's something that would be really cool for the developers of the game to maybe explore a little bit in something like a sequel or a DLC, because the story they wanted to tell, they do tell, and they tell it, I felt very satisfyingly. It was just, you get this glimpse into kind of this other thing, and I was like, wait, what's that? I would like more. I really had like a very strong Page of Swords experience there. So I think like it's fair to say that that's the weakest point of the game, but I also personally feel like it is a game without many particular weaknesses. Not that it's like a perfect game, but I don't think its weak points are particularly strong, and they certainly don't like ruin the game at all. Um, I also think there's a certain amount of just like personal taste to that statement, though. If you play the game, you'll have to let me know. You'll probably know what I'm talking about with that Page of Swords moment that I had. So I'd be curious to know if you had that as well. The last card that I pulled, this was to represent the final conclusions that I'd have about the game when I finished playing. And I drew the Three of Cups, and I had said at the time that I drew this that I thought it was really going to make me feel like it was a game about togetherness and the way that I want to unite with people. It maybe caused me to want to lean into my friends a little bit more. And I think that that holds up a little bit. There's this theme of the game that I feel like is really strong about how we can only accomplish great challenges together. You hear these almost like mottos of the expedition throughout the game of like, we continue for those that come after us. And there's this idea that like the goals we're trying to accomplish are so big and so grand. We're not just doing it for ourselves. Even if we fail in our primary goal, we will hopefully have made things easier for other people. We will hopefully have like lightened the burden for our friends, for our allies. Every time you finish a fight, it gives you, you know, like your level up page or whatever, and when you are ready to get out of that page, you press a button that always says "we continue." There's this whole thing of like everyone being in it together, and we're doing this for all of us, even the people we don't know, even the people who are not yet born. And usually I think of the Three of Cups as more intimate than that. I think of it as more of a sign of like your very close circle of friends, but I still think that there is this like message of togetherness, coming together and uniting, that's really central to the Three of Cups, and is one of the main central themes of the game. Even the sort of conclusion of the game, again, I'll try not to give too much away, but even the conclusion of the game really sort of revolves around this idea of like, how do you choose to continue forward with people, and who do you choose to continue forward with, and what is that relationship like now based on the choices that you make kind of in the conclusive moments of the game. Really, really excellent themes for a game, and really well delivered. Three of Cups, I feel like, is maybe not the best card to sort of summarize them, but it's certainly an appropriate one. So overall, my review for Expedition 33, it's a really wonderful game. If you are somebody who's into video games, I highly recommend it. Even if turn-based gameplay is not your usual thing, you might enjoy it. And I think you'll really enjoy it from like a story perspective. It is really creative. I can really see why I pulled these wand cards, why this Page of Swords was in there. It's super creative. You can tell there's a lot of like passionate energy behind it from the people creating it. It really did pique my curiosity. It really made me want to explore. I left that game having had like the time of my life and wishing that there were just a lot more media of that world for me to digest. I really do hope that they do more with that world. I hope that we get to see something like a sequel or maybe some kind of spin-off type of thing. I would really be interested in visiting more of that world, but I also think that it works perfectly as a self-contained, this is one story, this is all that there's going to be, there's kind of all that there needs to be, because I think those questions that the game wants you to ask, the things it wants you to wonder about, that feels like part of the point, to have these questions, to wonder what is happening out there, or to wonder what could have happened had things gone differently. It feels like that's part of the point. So maybe a sequel or spin-off is not really appropriate for that kind of thing, but it is extremely well structured. I feel like this Emperor card was probably the most appropriate out of all of these, and I was impressed at how this Four of Swords came back, that I had this thought of the game might be slow paced, because this is such a card of like rest, but it really wasn't slow paced at all. However, it did really feel like a break from my normal video gaming, and I liked that about it a lot, actually. So I highly recommend playing the game. If you do, or if you already have, I would be so curious to know what you think about the cards that I pulled and how they relate to the experience or your experience of playing that game. If this is the type of thing that's interesting to you, pulling tarot cards to unpack a video game or a show or a movie, I also just recently started playing Cyberpunk and made a tarot reading for that before I started playing, and I'd be interested in doing more of these. So if it's something that people care to watch, let me know, and I'd be happy to review other games too. Thanks for hanging out, though, and for watching, for listening. I hope you have a great day.